welcome. Let's start for today. We will be live in like literally 10 seconds. And we will start with Karakia. Yeah, please. Pakitaka ho DJ, Pakitaka ho DJ Tonga, Hiama kina kina kita, Hiama tara tara te kara, Ehi ake ana te atakura, E tio, e huka, e auhu, Tihe, mohu. Okay, so for today we have got Victoria online.
Hello.
And Pauline and Jake are running late, but Jake will be here in person and Pauline will be online. And so as Mike will be online soon too. We can be ready to begin. Yeah. So
Sarah here.
Sarah is here. Yep.
I made it.
Okay, well, Sarah, please join us. People.
Oh. Yeah. Turn it on.
Wait up. One worked.
Oh yeah, I was pushing the wrong one. Use it, Kira.
Yeah. Welcome.
Okay, kia ora koutou. My name is Sarah. I'm a policy projects advisor and I'm in the community support and partnerships unit of the council. I've been at the council for a few years and I've worked in public health and nutrition for a wee while, and so I'm kind of bringing that sort of lens across things at the council. And today I'm here to give you a bit of an update and get your feedback on the food resilience policy refresh and the action plan as well. I wanted to start with something very simple. Food shows up in almost every community conversation we have, whether it's about the cost of living, emergency preparedness, the access to green spaces, community gardens, or the well-being of our families and older people. Food is always there. And this work is not about telling people what to eat simply or anything like that. It's about making sure people can access good food close to home in a way that is fair, resilient, and future-focused. So I'll keep my presentation relatively short because we're really here to hear your perspectives on this. And get your input. So I'll just cover off what is food resilience broadly, what the new draft policy is covering, what does our current food system look like today in Aotearoa, why does it matter to the councils, to the boards, and get this. So Christchurch first adopted a food resilience policy back in 2014 in partnership with the Food Resilience Network. And since then, a lot has changed. We've experienced a pandemic, rising food prices, climate disruption, and increasing pressures on households. And those changes are very visible in communities around Ōtautahi. So Council defines food resilience as access by all people to a food supply that can withstand natural and human-made shocks and sustain a healthy lifestyle. So the refreshed policy is really building on this definition and strengthens it in several important ways. So the first is systems thinking. So food doesn't really sit in one place. It doesn't sit with one organisation. It doesn't sit in one area. It's really, really complex, from the growing and the processing to manufacturing to transport to retail, waste, emergency response. And when one part of that system is under pressure, the impacts are felt everywhere. So no single organisation can fix this on their own either, and meaningful change really does require a lot of connecting across sectors and collaboration across the whole system. The second is equity. So food insecurity is not about a lack of food supply. Aotearoa produces more than enough food. The issue is affordability, access, and how the system is really structured. So where you live, how much you earn, and your background should not be determining whether you can access healthy and culturally appropriate food. The third is really focusing on strengthening a local food system. So growing, producing, and distributing food closer to home supports local jobs, it reduces vulnerability during disruptions, and helps communities reconnect to where their food comes from. And the fourth is culture and community. Food is a connector. It brings people together across cultures and generations, supports identity, and plays a central role in well-being. And finally, preparedness. Food resilience is about being more future-proof, particularly during emergencies when food can quickly become a critical issue. And this work has been grounded in Te Ao Māori values. Manaakitanga, kaitiakitanga, whanaungatanga, and Mautaranga Māori are all embedded throughout these draft documents. Oh, sorry. I didn't really bad at this. So food resilience cuts across much of what councils and boards are already doing. Through workshops with council staff, the message was clear that it's not necessarily about adding more work, but about being a bit more intentional and more aligned and more strategic. The refresh policy through engagements brings together at this stage of a draft policy 7 different areas, core areas, including equitable access to food, urban spaces that are preserved and nurtured, lifelong food skills of cooking and growing, etc., a thriving food economy and good jobs, a climate resilient and sustainable system, a food system that the region has good governance over, there's good coordination, and we're prepared for disruptions, and then a circular zero waste as well is another area. So many of these activities are already happening in the council and the communities, and this policy is really just to support as a strategic or a framework to make sure that we're more connected and strategic. So why do we focus on food, or why are we focusing on food resilience? Why is it important? Just to give a bit of a setting of the scene of where we're at today with our food system, which you might already be well aware of. But most of New Zealanders are actually not eating a healthy diet. About less than 10% of adults and children are eating the recommended daily intake of fruit and veg. Our food environments are really unhealthy. So unhealthy food marketing is everywhere, and our children are most exposed to this. They see about over 87, I think, ads and visuals of unhealthy food, and it's a lot more than what they see around healthy eating. And this really does shape preferences and behaviours later in life. Our food insecurity is not reducing. The State and Nation report had highlighted approximately 1 in 4 children are food insecure, and that's a shift from 1 in 5 back in 2010. It's inequitable, so the burden is placed on Māori, and the health outcomes are extremely inequitable. It's a very expensive problem. So most of our health expenditure is related to things to do with our diets and what we're eating. And our food system at the moment is causing a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions, so it's not very sustainable. More than half of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our food system. And climate risks and vulnerabilities are making our food system more vulnerable and impacting particularly our growers as well. On a more positive note, we are a big manufacturing hub in Christchurch, so we employ over 22,000 jobs in the manufacturing industry. So why does it matter to the council? Well, it affects health, equity, climate, culture, the economy, and emergency preparedness. And all of these areas are where local government plays a role in. Council influences food outcomes through planning and land use. Our community facilities and spaces can be used for food-related events and initiatives. Partnerships with organisations, community organisations and businesses, waste systems, climate adaptation and emergency management. And it also helps us to meet like council's statutory obligations, including the Local Government Act, the Waste Minimisation Act, the Health Act, the Climate Change Act, and civil defence legislation as well. So just as next steps, based on the feedback you get from the boards, there's been quite a lot of activity around getting engagement from the sector, from various sectors within the council, with community organisations, and the boards now. And we have a draft that needs to be refined from the feedback that we get. And that will be done in April. There's an action planning workshop that you're all more than welcome to come to. So we're trying to get lots of different people in the sector in the room, including our private sector. So, you know, local supermarkets, our growers, some of our bakeries, and thinking very big and broad, as well as our community sector, which does a lot of great work. And I've got the flyers here, so I'll just get passing around. And then we'll refine an action plan based on that. We've also had a workshop at the end of September last year. We had another workshop which was well attended, mostly by community orgs, and academics, but we're trying to get a lot of variety in the sector. And then we will socialise a refreshed policy and action plan in June and July. But I just had 4 key questions I'd really be keen to get your views on, and anything else that has kind of popped up as you've been sitting and listening. What I'm really interested in what you think the council's role is, or the mechanisms or the key levers that the boards have that either previously influenced food resilience outcomes, or you think it can. And what are the strengths of your board area in driving positive outcomes? What does your community say they want and they need? What are you hearing? And what do you think enables and hinders progress in food resilience in your board area? It's just trying to paint a bit of a picture there. So just open up the floor to anyone who had also any questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. This is incredibly interesting, I find. I have loads of questions, probably stemming from mechanisms of what board and council can do. And I'm thinking out loud, one of those things is asking questions about to do and monitoring the situation. And from a council point of view, I'm wondering about setting an example too, because I was just thinking about when it comes to food quality and that astounding figure that only 10% of people are getting their appropriate intakes, fueling. I'm often probably one of the 90%. And I'm thinking about things, just ground level things like vending machines, food vending machines in council premises or any premises, both private and public sector. Yeah. I know a workplace I'm in, the most healthy thing in the vending machine is the 2-minute noodle kind of a product. That's as good as it gets. The rest is pretty much sugar. So I'm thinking about that sort of, ground level example setting stuff. But from the report, I haven't read the whole thing, but and forgive me if it's in there, but I'm interested about the inclusion of ecological services in the report, and whether there's a connection to organisations in our city who are not directly in the food sector per se, but they're doing things like the urban forest network and that sort of thing, which are not things that you can eat, but they propagate insects and microflora, birds, bees, pollination, those sorts of things, which is essential for helping to enable the growing of food within the city and around it. I'd love to see that included in the plan. And another big one at the moment is fuel, because we have an umbilical cord to a part of the world where there's some constriction at the moment. But most people don't realise we also have a 20,000 kilometre long umbilical cord to North Africa where our superphosphate comes from. And we're very reliant on that for the, in commercial level farming. And that could become a problem soon. And I wonder if that element of risk is included in the thinking, the policy thinking that's being done.
Yeah.
So I kind of bundled 3 questions in there.
I'll try to answer them.
Sure.
I think with there is a healthy food and drink policy as well that we have in the council, and I think there's quite a lot of crossover between the two. And I think in terms of, so that they are promoted in terms of providing healthy food in our facilities, they're not necessarily enforced. So, and I suppose that would need more oversight and governance and control. So that would need some organisation within council, I suppose, to really focus in on that, and maybe doing an audit, seeing what is provided in our environments, and should there be any changes. But it is something that's come up, and we've done some when we've talked to the council staff. Facilities have been kind of invited to conversation as well. So trying to cover off all those areas. The biodiversity, we probably through our community orgs, maybe more so they've participated in the conversation around ensuring what we grow is biodiverse, and thinking about all the things that benefit from that, like the insects. But it's probably had more of a focus, or I've talked to it's more regenerative farming practices of protecting land. It's been more of a thing that's kind of been of a focus when it comes to growing of food.
Yeah. Because comboing that with the full circle, it possibly helps ameliorate that dependency on imported phosphates. Not completely, but
and the fuel, there's been less conversation about that too, and I've just trying to engage more with farmers. I think that's quite a challenge, just in terms of exporting and importing and how much they rely on the global market. Including fertilizers and fuels, and the world needs us and we need the world type thing for them to be able to, there's that, I guess there's a tension between local and global. Yeah.
Thank you. Victoria?
Oh, thank you for that. It's a bit hard to engage when I'm online, but thank you for the presentation. I'm just keen to understand what's changing, because there's no change in the strategic direction, and your report also says there's no new work or decisions outside of the current scope. So what is it that's in the refreshed policy and the action plan that's changed?
I think one of the key things is probably more around the governance, that we need to prioritise having good governance of the food system, and having people around the table that will ensure that the action plan and the policy and the people who govern it are really well supported to help things progress and move along and are tracked and monitored. We've had really good energy in the sector, and I think there needs to be continued support, but there's also a changing environment. Like we do have more of the lens around the equity issue, around ensuring that our resources and our efforts are also going into things that are going to reduce inequities and have sustainable solutions.
So you touched on the monitoring, and I'm pleased you said that, because you've highlighted that this continues to be a big problem with growing inequity, and there's been no shift or major shift in the food resilience network. So how do you measure the success of your interventions and the partnership work that we're doing? Because if there's been no improvement, then we're not really hitting the mark. So how do we monitor and how do we measure? You can have governance and meetings up the wazoo, but if you're not actually having any measurable impact, what are you governing over if you're not measuring it? So I'd like to hear, how do you measure the success of what we're doing?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we haven't made progress as a city in terms of food resilience, and I think a lot of effort and coordination has gone over time historically to, there's a lot we can celebrate, I think, as a sector. I think it's more difficult to actually measure those things, and they do require a lot of resourcing and support and ongoing tracking and monitoring and leadership and I suppose feeding into something, so which is always challenging with with resourcing. But I do think a really strong action plan that has commitments, that has strategic funding towards would make that would really help that and accelerate our efforts.
So what you've touched on a couple of times, but what does that tracking and monitoring actually look like, and where do we see that tracking and monitoring and variance in our efforts? Where is that?
So we will be having an action planning workshop in the end of April. I think part of that conversation or afterwards is also an internal one from council around organising ourselves, whether it's a partnership. So we're already creating partnerships across the city who are really want to see this work continued and prioritised. So it could be that there's a group of us with influence or with as this being a priority to monitor that. You need things that are, I suppose, measurable, and you need commitment. So that's what an action plan can do, a monitoring framework. So you really have to get really deep into it, and that will take some time.
So I think that, you've asked those questions about what are the enablers and the barriers, and I think it is around funding and resourcing. So what is the current annual budget provision, and is there any change proposed to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see, food resilience being like money being ring fenced, there being highlighted some really, and we do have an action plan, but it's being refreshed around ensuring that funding is going to these certain areas that are needed to have meaningful impacts.
So what is the budget provision for this work, and where does it come out of? Because I know we've got the sustainability fund allocation coming up at the council meeting on the 1st of April, and there's a number of community organisations that are working in the food resilience space that are sitting in there. So other than the sustainability fund allocation, where else does the funding come from? Where do we see it?
Strengthening Communities Fund does fund some initiatives.
Yep.
But it's a good point. I think it really needs good resourcing. I think also it's around the partnerships that we create, and there are lots of opportunities. It's why we're trying to bring in private sector in the room as well. They come along with a lot of resources and a lot of partnerships that could be made. Obviously, there'll be things that need lots of investment, and then there'll be other things that we have assets and, we have resourcing within the sector that could be shared.
I suppose the issue for me, and I think it's probably coming across in the nature of my questions, is, we're facing a rates cap. There is significant pressure on our funding. So when it comes to allocating funds, we've got to be able to show some the value of that investment. And so if you can turn your minds to how do you monitor and measure the success of what we're doing, I think that will certainly help towards the merits of any funding applications. But I think what it does is it comes down to funding. In the Papanui ward, we don't have as bigger active community gardens as some of the other areas, like in the Marihau with the River Corridor and Revolution and all of those wonderful community gardens. We don't have as much of that, but the council have been really supportive with one of the small local groups in a couple of local parks where they've allowed them to trial putting up some community veggie gardens. And I think that that's one way that council can enable at a real grassroots level without requiring a significant investment, how they can support their community. There's in the last couple of years, there's been 2 little pocket parks that have had some planting initiatives, and I think that that's been relatively successful for relatively low investment.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. Pauline, please.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And I think just dovetailing into Victoria's points there, that if you have a look and you see that there's a lot of parts of council that can contribute towards food resiliency. So it goes across all of our projects and programs. That includes waste minimisation, our community grants, our parks, our transport, property and climate resilience. So they'll all have ways that they can contribute. For instance, we did the street trees, didn't we, on, was it Emma on Courtney or Roosevelt? So that would be from the street tree budget, or, partnering with them sort of thing. So there's little pockets of money here and there where it goes in. And of course, our community board has always been incredibly supportive of community gardens, as Victoria alluded to as well. We've got our edible gardens recognition, I like to call them, not awards, but recognition certificates. And I'd love to see them grow bigger and go back to having an event. I say this quite frequently, but I think we've got to really empower people and recognise the efforts that they make. And Victoria used the word grassroots, and I think that's where we've got to keep focused with this kind of stuff, that it's, educating people. Another area that needs funding, and which we do fund, but I think could be more, is coordinators for these gardens, because there's a lot of volunteers, but they need to be, coordinated, and there's quite a lot of work doing that. So currently we've got a coordinator that helps at Pack Street, St Albans and Aberley Park, the 3 together, that sort of thing. We do other areas as well. Some of the barriers, and our board has identified this and it's increasing, is the availability of green space, particularly in areas where the intensification is huge. So that is, I think, where that planning document will show us the gaps, but then we need resourcing to be able to purchase that land and find a use for it. So that's one of the barriers, I think. So, I think, and another big thing that we need to do, and I think we'll touch on this in your workshop, is the education for people. And once you've grown the food, like what's the best food to grow? What's the easiest food to grow that's going to give you the best bang for buck, the best crop and the best amount of it? And then how do you prepare it? What do you do with it? I think that needs to be a really big focus, so that we, minimise the waste. And we also need to encourage local small composting, so that also reduces the waste. So, I think that our board has been, and for a long time, very supportive of these grassroots community gardens with schools as well. And then we've got Keep Christchurch Beautiful, that gives schools awards for their edible gardens and waste minimisation. So like you say, I think, Sarah, you touched on it all, that collaboration and partnership is the key. If I can just touch on and then I'll shut up, your invite list. Are you going out to schools as well and all the local community centres with their gardening, the little, community gardens, along with the big ones like, Revolution and all that.
Thanks, Pauline, for all your awesome thoughts and ideas. Yes, schools, we haven't actually reached out directly to schools, which is a good point. We've reached out to, say, Garden to Table, who does programs in schools. And we have reached out to some of the community gardens as well.
Yeah, I think schools is a really important one to get them. That's where the children learn, and when the children learn, that's where our future is, isn't it? Okay, thank you. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. I've got actually, but before that, I just add on to Pauline, you've stole all my points. So from the education point of view, that what you mentioned, that group with what did you say, garden to table, or somewhere we look into a campaign which is from farm to plate and beyond, and that can actually filter through from schools, logistics, of course, our commercial partners, and also food resilience groups which work with communities such as Kairos, City Mission, Salvation Army, and all possible social agencies. Because it's like 360-degree approach, right? That's what we need to look into it. One is growing logistics of it, but then beyond as well, which goes into our waste management and so on. And healthy habits. So that's something is like really reinforcing. I remember I used to be a preschool teacher, and making good choices when you offer food to children on table. They used to get this green sticker, like a healthy heart type thing. So I don't know how we do that, but for example, using bikes. We've done really well in terms of encouraging young people to use buy our bike to school or buy programs, which council, campaigned well. So similar type campaign needs to be sort of simultaneously run, which will draw other partners and agencies towards this issue, basically. So thank you, Sarah, for your work, and Ashley.
Right. Just based on what I've heard with everyone's couple of questions you guys have put in, to me, a lot of what you've said is more on personal influence on people, but also on companies as well as individuals. So how can you influence communities to be better, choose better? And where can you help them to make it easier? Because people are getting lazier. So it's more, where can you make life easier for them? So then they want it quicker, easier. They don't have to think. Like Pauline has said also with the school, starting them young at preschool, awards, like all that is fantastic, I would say. And another thing is going on the waste is, there is a book out there and it's fantastic. Waste Not, Want Not, educating people, or schemes you guys can do is like, how can we prevent that being wasted by using it?
Yeah. Would you like me to respond?
No, just key points feedback too. Yeah.
No, cool. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
What you wanted from us. But I guess collaborative approach, getting everyone on board, from making sure that we have touched from schools, families, individuals, social organizations, and commercial partners.
Yeah.
That even if we manage to get that connection established, that itself is quite a big piece of and it will set us foundational grounding for us.
It's so wide and multimodal.
Oh yes, yeah.
I did want to just
Please.
We did engage with community around what they want to see more of, what do they want from council, or what do they want happening. And a lot of that was around, obviously affordable food. So there's a lot of initiatives that can be done and supported to make food more affordable. Like fruit and veggie bag co-ops that cut out cut out the middleman, and you can reduce the cost of fruit and veggie bags. There's also the food education component where we support organisations. We also have council facilities with kitchens and things like that, where we can provide spaces and places for food education as well, and supporting organisations, I guess, with their work that they do in schools. Just on that one point. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I have the invites in case you want to come along.
No, where?
You just have to scan the QR code and register. Google. There's a score from Hong Kong.
Will we get one of those flyers electronic? Well, that'd be good.
I get an email so we can circulate it there.
Yep.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, Sarah.
Thanks. Now, next is for our bylaws, and we have Philip and Tina. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hey,
Thank you for having us along. I'm Tina, this is Philip. We're in the policy team, and part of the role of our team is to manage the bylaw review program that the council has and to provide advice on any bylaw related matters. So we're here to give you what will either, depending on how long you've been around, be a refresher or a sort of bylaws 101. And we are very happy to take questions as we go through. It's about you asking anything you'd like to ask or learning and understanding anything that you're interested in. So we're going to take you through that sort of bylaws 101 stuff, and then we'll talk a little bit about the bylaws that are being reviewed this term. So of our 16 bylaws, we're reviewing 11 this term, which is quite an extraordinary number of bylaws. It's a very heavy workload at the moment. And then Philip is going to take us through the alcohol restrictions in public places bylaw, which is sort of the first project that we've got underway. So bylaws are local laws which are made by council that only apply in the district in which they are made, and they normally require something to be done or not to be done, and there's a penalty for not complying. They generally regulate things that impact on council land or infrastructure, so public places, parks, roads, and the infrastructure can cross over, so things like pipes that run from private property to the public system. The activities there are regulated in bylaws. We need legislation to make a bylaw, so this is really important. The council can't regulate what it likes. It has to have utilise bylaw making powers that exist in legislation, and that those bylaw making powers can be very broad or very narrow, and they have a big impact on what we can regulate as a council. Of the 16 bylaws that we have, and they're all publicly available on the website, they're made under 8 different statutes. So one of those is the Local Government Act, which is one of the primary ones, but there are many others like the Freedom Camping Act, the Dog Control Act, the Land Transport Act, Prostitution Reform Act, the Waste Minimisation Act, the Dog Control Act, and others. And sometimes the bylaws will be made under the Local Government Act and another piece of legislation, or sometimes just under that other piece of legislation. So although they're all bylaws, they can be very different in what they regulate and how they regulate, and even in terms of penalties. They're ultimately a regulatory tool, and the bylaw making process is a law making process, so it has to follow quite rigorous processes. But when we have a bylaw in place, it enables us to manage activities that occur and prevent damage and things, and enables enforcement. And the options that we have in the enforcement roles vary, and I'll take us through some examples on the next page. So these are the 16 bylaws that we have. Several can only be enforced by the police. The council has no legal enforcement role. So the alcohol restrictions in public places is one. The cruising and prohibited times on roads is another. So that's antisocial road use. So generally anything that involves a moving vehicle, then it's a police enforcement matter. If it's a stationary vehicle, then our parking enforcement team can undertake enforcement action. And are the main ones for the police, other than parts of the traffic and parking bylaw. We have two special enforcement teams. So the dog control bylaw has the animal management as a specialist enforcement team, and the parking compliance team undertake compliance action in relation to the traffic and parking bylaw. And for one of our bylaws, we have a contractor, which is the freedom camping bylaw, and that's because those activities happen primarily in the evening and in the early mornings. So we hire a security company to undertake that enforcement action, so they're warranted under the legislation to be able to enforce that. Did anybody have any questions about any of those bylaws? I thought you were thinking.
Just not about any of the specific bylaws there themselves, but the review dates on them. I'm thinking of your workload actually. So of the 16, 11 are up for review this year. I remember dogs were done fairly recently as with waste minimisation. So we're down to 3 over the next 10 years or so. Why is it so lumpy?
One of the reasons is because the changes to the water services legislation have happened. So the new way of managing water has brought forward the review of our 3 water services bylaws. So that's the water supply and wastewater bylaw, the stormwater and land drainage bylaw, and the trade waste bylaw, which is about industrial and commercial waste that goes into the wastewater system. So we have to review those out of sequence. And that's quite a different kind of review to what we would normally do. It's because of the legislation, it's got a whole new structure, and we've got to review it in relation to consistency with the legislative changes that were made. So that's a little bit different. Other than that, it's just sometimes how it works out. So we stagger them. We've got a 10-year timetable that manages all of those reviews. So when we're first reviewing a bylaw, we have to do it within the first 5 years of it being made. And then once it's an established bylaw, it's at least once every 10 years. So we bring them forward, but we can't really push them back. And then we're also working within council terms. So because of the election period and other times, there's no-go zones, and we try and complete reviews within one term of council so that we're not engaging across that sort of election period as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Curious.
You're welcome. So as I said, the legislation sets the scope. Some of our bylaw making powers are very narrow and have a high threshold for evidence. And Philip will take you through the alcohol one, but that has a highest threshold for evidence in terms of proving that we should be using our regulatory power. The Freedom Camping Act has very narrow bylaw making powers and quite a high test. And that's an area where we often get, the country often gets challenges around bylaws. So it's quite interesting. We'll often get questions, why don't we have a bylaw to regulate this thing? Or why don't we regulate in this particular way with this subject matter bylaw? And the answer is often because of the legislation that it's made under and the scope and the assessment there. So the Local Government Act, which is common to many bylaws, so a lot of our bylaws are made under the Local Government Act, and then it gets a bit tricky, but some of our other bylaws, like the dog control one, are made under the Dog Control Act, but they're deemed to be made under the Local Government Act. So they follow those Local Government Act processes in terms of the review timeframes and other things. And slightly obscured there, but the box on the right sets out what we call the Section 155 test. So that's in the Local Government Act, thank you. And that requires, when we're making a bylaw that involves a Local Government Act power, or is deemed to be made under it, then we have to assess that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problem. And I should say too that a review process is the same process as making a bylaw for the first time. So it's very involved. So we go through and assess all of the clauses that we have, look at whether they fit with the bylaw making power, whether there have been legislative changes, whether there are operational changes and other things, and then work out whether we should adjust or continue that particular clause. The second test there is the bylaw the most appropriate form? And that's really about clarity, that it's written in a way that's understandable and it's clear what needs to happen or not happen. And then for these bylaws, and this is true for some of the bylaws as well, like the Freedom Camping bylaws, we also have to do an assessment under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. Now, that's a very important constitutional act that we have, and it protects those rights and freedoms that we expect in a free and democratic society. So for bylaws, it tends to be things like freedom of association, freedom of movement, and freedom of expression are probably 3 of the main ones that we need to assess under. And then Section 5 of the Bill of Rights Act does allow justifiable limitations. So we have to make a clear legal argument that we can, in some cases, limit those freedoms if it's demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. Again, lawmaking process, so legal arguments to justify and understand what we're doing. So I guess one example of that would be the cruising and prohibited times on roads bylaw. So the prohibited times on roads part limits access by vehicles to certain roads within certain hours. And so that's a limitation on the freedom of movement. So we had to justify that in terms of legal arguments that it was to protect the safety and antisocial behaviour and damage and things like that. And that it would only apply within certain hours and they're not through routes. And so there was a whole legal argument there that we had to document during that process. The general principles of bylaws, and these are related to the Bylaws Act of 1910, but it's sort of good legal principles. So a bylaw cannot be ultra vires, that means outside of legal power. So it comes back to that bylaw making power that we were talking about earlier. They can't be repugnant to the laws of New Zealand. So that's where we're, in conflict with existing law. So it's secondary legislation, so it can't overrule or be in conflict with other laws. It can't be uncertain, so the certainty is around the clarity, around it has to be clear what happens and doesn't happen, and it can't be unreasonable. And reasonableness, there's a lot of case law about what constitutes reasonableness. And down the bottom, their bylaws can be challenged either through the Bylaws Act 1910, which sets out those principles, or through judicial review. And that does happen. There's a case at the moment in Auckland around their dog control bylaw. There have been freedom camping challenges from the Motor Caravan Association. We've only ever had one bylaw challenged, and that was in 2005. And that was, we were the first council to make a bylaw under the new Prostitution Reform Act in 2003. And that was challenged on the basis of reasonableness and being ultra vires because it regulated too broadly and didn't take into account a certain group and where they may operate. So those legal tests are very important. So when we're reviewing a bylaw, we'll bear that in mind and provide advice on that for decision makers as well. Did anybody have any questions on any of those elements? So that legislative review cycle, generally it's at least once every 10 years. We can review a bylaw at any time, but it's a big process. It normally takes us 12 to 18 months to review a bylaw. And the final 6 months of that is the consultation and hearings and decision-making process. We can amend a bylaw at any time just to address a specific matter. But particularly at the moment, that's a real challenge because of this workload that we have within this term of council. And as I said before, that review process is the same as the bylaw making process. So it's not just a sort of quick look and say that looks like it's up to date and fit for purpose. We've got to go through that whole process, and it all has to be documented, and that documentation can be part of any challenge that happens. So we do that review, looking at all the clauses. That's often an internal review. So we work across, all bylaw reviews are led by the policy team, and we work with the legal team. And then the bylaws are nominally owned by operational units across council, and so we'll work with the operational staff that actively use the bylaw. And so that involves a lot of looking at any new issues that have happened, looking at any successes or failures we've had around any enforcement action, and looking at how we can improve and update. And then we prepare those reports, which is a big process, and then we go through the external process. So for this term of council, previously would go to council as a whole, but the Policy and Planning Committee considers bylaw matters in the first instance. So we'll take that report to the committee, and they'll decide whether they're happy with the review, whether to consult. All bylaw reviews, even if we're not making a single change, have to go through a consultation process and a hearings process. And depending on the legislation under which they're made, sometimes that's a full special consultative procedure, and sometimes it's giving effect to the principles of consultation in the Local Government Act. So for example, something very technical like the trade waste bylaw is not going to be of wide public interest. There's a lot of chemical formulas at the back of that one. It's normally for sort of engineers and lawyers and people that are involved in running those sorts of businesses. So we might target that consultation. Whereas something like the Dog Control Act affects, it's about regulating activities in public places. So that can affect everyone and anyone. And that particular bylaw has extra consultation requirements because of the Dog Control Act. So we've got to notify every registered dog owner, of which there are about 39,000. So that's a big project reviewing that one. We give people the right to be heard, so we hold hearings for these. So they're normally made up of a panel of councillors, but sometimes community board members can be on hearings panels. And then the final decision for bylaws is with council. That the Local Government Act does not allow that to be delegated. So an amendment or adopting a replacement bylaw or a new bylaw can only be done by council, and then the bylaw comes into force and could be operationalised. That's all I had on the bylaws process. Does anyone have any questions about? I'm rushing through things, but so these are the bylaws that we're reviewing this term. So the alcohol restrictions in public places, Philip will talk to you about shortly. Those 3, trade waste, stormwater and storm water supply, are the water services ones that we talked about. Even though they've been done recently, because of that legislative change, we've got to review them. Traffic and parking bylaw is a big and technical bylaw that is used often. You'll know that you use powers under it. The community board's got delegated powers to make certain decisions under the traffic and parking bylaw for a whole bunch of different parking things and yellow lines and other things. And then the stock on roads bylaw is about moving stock along and across roads. So it's largely Banks Peninsula, but a little bit in the north around Yoldhurst and other areas. I'll be reviewing those, and I'll probably come back and talk to the community board when we're in the thick of things. General bylaw is a legal bylaw that's quite procedural and again quite technical, so that wouldn't have a large consultation process. Marine, river and lake facilities bylaw is about the built structures that give access to things, so ramps and boat ramps and wharves and jetties and slipways and things like that. The brothels bylaw, the 3 at the end there will be reviewing later in the term. So that other projects I've just mentioned, they are sort of beginning now. The brothels bylaw regulates just the location and commercial sexual services signage. So it is quite limited. Public places bylaw regulates all our public places. So it's a big project, and there are a lot of policies that sit underneath that around how the council might give permission for certain activities to happen in space that the council manages. And then the cemeteries bylaw is about what can and cannot occur in cemeteries and memorials. That's all it is.
Right, thank you. I've got Victoria.
Thank you, Tina. Very comprehensive. There's a lot going on there. Picking up from John's question, recognising that there's 11 of 16 that need to be reviewed. If you were pushed for resources or time, are there any that can drop off that list?
I would need to look at the specific dates. So if we don't review a bylaw by 10 years after the day it was adopted, there is a 2-year grace period. But if you review it within that period, it makes it a new bylaw and not a reviewed bylaw, and that kicks it to a 5-year review period. And after that 2-year period, if you don't review it, it's automatically revoked. So
Okay, thanks for that. I'm interested in the traffic and parking bylaw one. A number of us are hearing from the community around parking pressures with the intensification of housing in our neighbourhoods and in our communities. Is that where you look at resident parking schemes under that bylaw, or is that a separate piece of work?
It would be a separate piece of work. So the bylaw might have a clause that refers to that sort of policy, and then the policy would be made outside of the bylaw. So it's sort of a cascade down.
So would there be any merit to doing the both of them at the same time? And would that be possible at this juncture?
It would make it a much bigger project, and the policy review can happen at any time, and the bylaw review has to happen within a certain time. So there might be overlaps, but the project's not far advanced enough to know what we might be doing in that space.
Just through you, Chair, I'd like us to keep an eye on that, please, because it is something that's been raised by many of us around this table, recognising the parking issues and in a perfect world, it would be nice to have those two done together. So if we can circle back to that at another time, that'd be great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Tina.
Welcome.
Thanks, Victoria. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Philip.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Philip. This part of the section is an opportunity for me to explain a little bit more about alcohol control bylaws generally, our alcohol control bylaws specifically, the public places in this community board area in which the bylaw applies, what's involved in the review of the bylaw and how this board can provide input into it. There's quite a bit of ground there to cover. So the three main points to get from the presentation, really, if I had to summarize them, would be that alcohol control bylaws have a specific and limited purpose. So they are about controlling the consumption and possession of alcohol in public places. As Tina was explaining earlier, the process for making alcohol control bylaws is set out in legislation, which requires that we meet certain criteria before we can put those restrictions in place. And we are wanting to hear from the community board about the appropriateness of the current bylaw and restrictions in this community board area, and whether we should be considering amending, removing, or potentially adding any new alcohol ban areas. So those are the sort of the main takeaway points from this presentation. Let me see if I can make this work. Turns out I can't. How do I how did you make this?
That would just work before.
Oh, here we go. Lovely. Thank you. So yes, that's right. As I mentioned, these types of bylaws have a specific and limited purpose. So we can use them to prohibit or regulate the consumption and possession of alcohol in public places, but not to deal directly with other potentially related behaviours, such as those that are listed on the slide there. So when we are making a new alcohol control bylaw, the law requires that we meet criteria, including that there is evidence that the area to which the bylaw, and this is a quote from the legislation, there is evidence that the area to which the bylaw is intended to apply has experienced a high level of crime or disorder that can be shown to have been caused or made worse by alcohol consumption in the area. That's what I mean when I talk about evidence. That's the standard there that we have to meet. Similarly, if we want to continue an existing alcohol control bylaw, then we must be satisfied that if we didn't have it, the pre-bylaw levels of crime and disorder would be likely to return to the areas in which it's intended to apply. Only the police can enforce alcohol control bylaws, so that's not something that council officers or others can enforce. For that reason, and also because for that reason, and because the bylaw has to work for the enforcers, it's important that we work closely with the police in the course of the review, and the infringement fine is $250. Let me move on to the next slide. So we've had an alcohol control bylaw, and before that, area-specific liquor bans in Christchurch for many years now. Our current bylaw was made in November 2018, and it replaced one from 2009. Because we have to review our bylaws every 10 years, we have until November 2028 to complete this review, which may seem like quite a long way away, but there's a considerable amount of work to do in this review, because as well as assessing the bylaw generally, we also have to assess all of our existing alcohol ban areas, and there are around 20 of those. When I'm talking about public places, this is what I mean. A place that is open to or being used by the public. This is taken from the Local Government Act, the legislation under which the bylaw is made, and it provides us with a definition of the places where the ban or the restrictions apply. It doesn't necessarily mean only land that is owned or managed by the council. It can also be any place that is open to or being used by the public, such as a non-council owned car park, for example. And I think in the central city, of those car parks where you can stroll from the footpath and onto a car park, those are, while the car park may be privately owned, it's a public place for the purposes of the alcohol control bylaw if it's included in a regulated area. The Local Government Act also specifies that licensed premises are excluded from the scope of alcohol control bans, and they wouldn't apply to private residences either. These are where our current alcohol ban areas are situated across our district. You'll see that the locations are colour-coded. This reflects the different settings that we use for the different alcohol ban areas. So you've got ones that have got a red dot. Those are the ones that are applying 24/7 every day. The ones that are in black dots are the alcohol ban areas that are in place at night only. So in this board area, you'll see that there are some alcohol ban areas that are applying that apply at all times, and some that apply only at night as well. Some of the the green dots indicate alcohol ban areas where the restrictions apply on specific times or on certain days or dates. So there are some in our district that would apply on one day of the year only, for example, on New Year's Eve. Others may apply for rugby league, for where rugby league is being played at a council rugby league playing field, and there are some in this district as well. I'll just explain. The next slides are where I just explain where some of these are in more detail. But before I do that, you'll see there are yellow dots as well. These are the alcohol ban areas that where restrictions apply for 24 hours when a nominated large-scale event is held there. So, for example, Hagley Park, if there is something like the Electric Avenue Festival, the council may nominate that for a large-scale event alcohol ban, and that means that for the 24 hours of the event, alcohol cannot be consumed or possessed in the restricted area. And in addition to that, if 14 days notice is given by the council, then it is possible to grant the police power of immediate search rather than having to give notice of their intention to search somebody for alcohol. Keep moving on. So these are the ban areas in this community board area. I won't dwell on these for too long, but you can see one in the central city is one of the ones that applies for 24 hours a day. We can see Hagley Park. You'll see there are two alcohol ban areas I'm going to refer to for Hagley Park. One is a ban area that applies every night from 10 in the evening, 7 in the morning. And the other is the large scale event alcohol ban. Same area, but just different timings. It enables the ban to apply at times outside of the usual. Where we are now in Papanui is subject to a nighttime ban. You'll notice I've got Papanui Domain Sports Park. That's one of the playing fields that will have a rugby league alcohol ban attached to it as well. Linwood Village as well is 24/7 one. And again, yeah, so these are the rugby league playing fields where restrictions apply whilst the fields are in use for rugby league. And that's at McFarlane Park. And just going to the process for reviewing alcohol control bylaws, we will be looking at police data of crime and disorder that's linked to drinking in the area. So in doing that, we are following the criteria for making and reviewing alcohol control bylaws. So we're actually having to apply two sets of criteria from the Local Government Act. One for making and reviewing bylaws generally. Tina talked about those in the first part of this presentation. And the Local Government Act actually has a specific section for alcohol control bylaws as well. So there's an additional layer that we have to apply there. We will be trying to understand, as well as looking at some of the police data for statistics, we'll be trying to understand from community boards on their views on the bylaw generally, and also whether a high level of crime and disorder that relates to drinking in the areas where there are currently bans would be likely to return if we didn't have the existing restrictions, or if they or whether any of the ban areas should be amended or continued unamended, or possibly even removed if their view is that there's no need for them anymore, and whether there are any other places in this community board area which should be considered as potential new alcohol ban areas. And because we're having to look at the bylaw generally and also the specific regulated areas, we want to know your views as well about the appropriateness of the bylaw full stop. Here's our high-level timeline for the review of this bylaw. Consultation will be next year, and that's an opportunity for community boards to make a formal submission to that process. In the meantime, we'd welcome any feedback that the board might want to give now or in writing if you wish to give some further thought to that. And because we're still at an early stage in the review, we're not in a position to set out our proposals yet for feedback. But we do plan on providing community boards with a memo which will outline our developing thinking at that point. And you may wish to request a follow-up session if that's of interest, or possibly set out your views in writing. But in any event, as I mentioned, you'll have that opportunity to make submissions when we go out to consultation. So that is the end of that section. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Cool. Thank you, Philip. I've got Jake.
Thank you. Do you have any idea of how we compare to other major metros, particularly in terms of the amount of liquor ban areas that we have?
Not off the top of my head, no. The principle, and this isn't directly answering your question, but the principle is that we should be regulating where there is need and not putting in place regulations where there is not a justified case for having them.
But if there was a mismatch between different places, I'd be suspicious as to whether we were actually always meeting that criteria.
And it is difficult to make a like for like comparison, given that some of the, in terms of the number of alcohol ban areas, because some of them will apply for one day of the year only, for example, which means it may not be just a numbers game in that way. But I don't.
That's not a huge curiosity. Yeah.
Oh, Victoria, do you have a question?
I think my hand's up from the previous presentation, so sorry, I'll lower that down now.
That's
I've got some on the next presentation, so I might just leave it up.
No, cool. Simon, please.
Thank you. Just a quick one. As part of the review, if you must sort of reassess our current areas and be satisfied that crime or disorder is likely to return. That sounds like you're being able to sort of prove it negative, and I'm just wondering what your approach is to that.
It's a tricky one because I imagine compared to looking at statistics of where crime and disorder has occurred, you're right, you're having to assess likelihood rather than weighing up the statistics of what has happened. That's one of the reasons why we're speaking to community boards to understand the views of, well, we're looking at likelihood, so we're having to deal with your, it is useful to deal with your experience of life on the ground and what you hear from your community. Their reservations may be about what would happen if these things weren't there, or sorry, and we, in speaking to the police, won't just be asking them for their statistics, we'll also be asking them for their experience of being on the beat and hearing from the community, and again hearing from people who may be pleased that they're there because they help prevent crime, concerned that if they're potentially going to lose those restrictions, or they may feel that and you may hear that the restrictions are no longer necessary because the circumstances have changed since when they were put in place, and the behavioural patterns are such that there isn't a need for these restrictions to be there any further. So yes, we're looking for facts and figures, but also we're looking for the experience and knowledge from relating to the local area, because we're going to have to look at likelihood, which is harder to nail down.
Oh, thank you.
You, John.
Thank you, Phil. I want to go back to your map of this.
Oh, yes.
Just with a couple of curiosities. I'll pick on Area J, Papanui.
Yeah.
And perhaps my Papanui colleagues might be able to enlighten me on this also. That's a vast area. It looks like the whole suburb is subject to, let's see, it's a
here we go.
What colour is, if it's a J, item J, applies at night, 7 days a week, the whole suburb of Papanui. When and how did that come to pass? Because it's a bit of an operator, not every suburb.
Yeah.
Not every suburb, but
Not the whole.
certainly post-quake, when clusters of licensed premises moved further out of the central city and those neighbourhood sort of bar areas grew. That's why some of some of the neighbourhood areas have them in place. So, and touching on what Philip said before about the evidence stuff, we're looking at also the reason they were put in place in the first instance to sort of gauge the nature of them. So some of them are around things like clusters of licensed premises, or sometimes fast food outlets that are open. Sometimes it's related to events. There's all sorts of different reasons why we would have them in place. So we'll look at that. But the Papanui one, I believe, is around that sort of entertainment area. You get spillover effects or pre-drinking, and that's the nature of some of those issues.
And another thing, just to clarify, I guess, is that the review is not just should the current restricted area remain in place, yes or no. It's also, are these the right times? Is this in the right area? Do we need to make it bigger, smaller, apply it to this street, that street? So when I mentioned that we've got a couple of years to do it, it's quite an involved process, because you're having to apply that standard evidential threshold to all of these ones, as well as the bylaw generally.
And anywhere where you put a ban in place, there's the potential for displacement as well. So sometimes you'll look at the area where the crime is occurring and where things are likely to occur, but it might then, if you ban it, happen just outside of that because there's a park nearby or an area where people congregate or whatever. So that's part of how the mapping sort of evolves over time. And of course, these are all consulted on, so the influence of, the views of the public and what the community thought at the time come into play as well.
No, thanks, that's very enlightening. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
On the list, we have Jennifer. Hi, you're Jennifer. Hello.
How are you doing? I've got Amanda O's and Susan with me as well. They're from the Heritage team.
Amanda and Susan.
So, hi, I'm Jennifer Rankin. I'm the Senior Project Manager in the Transport team. I've been around for quite some time, so apologies if you'll recognise me. It's been a long time. So I'm bringing Condell Avenue to you today, which has been also around a very long time, even before my time. So it was actually a project that was around before the earthquakes came along, street renewal project. Earthquakes came along, and unfortunately our whole street renewal project got affected, and that included Condell Avenue. You're probably very aware that it then got tagged onto the MCR program to be constructed and implemented along with that MCR program. And then it was removed from that program back in 2022, just with reprioritization of council projects. And then it was placed on a hold. So it's finally back. It's back as of last year. It came up with some money. So we are back with you today to talk about a street renewal for Condell Avenue. Very long overdue, I'm very aware. What has happened since it was pulled off and put back on the programme is that the water main along Condell Avenue has been renewed, and we made sure that they provided that cover there needed for that road reconstruction. So that's a good news story. What also happened since it kind of started is that this area got a designation last year in 2025. And that's why I've got my lovely colleagues here from the Heritage team with me. So they're going to talk to you about what's happened last year and what that kind of means for the Papanui ward.
Thanks, Jenny. Members of the Papanui community have been bringing our attention to this unique heritage item for a while now and have sought its recognition as early as 2015 in the context of the district plan review, and more recently in the context of the heritage plan change. So it was through information provided by submitters and our additional research that we were able to assess the memorial. It's made up of 16 streets with avenues and parks, and we use the district plan heritage criteria for that assessment. The memorial was assessed as being of high historical and social, cultural, and spiritual and contextual significance, and overall highly significant to the district. So why is this collection of avenues and parks so significant? Well, this Living World War II memorial was actually community driven and partly community funded as a collaboration with council. And it's the result of a request in the 1940s by Christchurch and Papanui Beautifying Associations and the Return Services Association. The request was that council plant memorial trees in a variety of species in Papanui streets as a living memorial to the memory of fallen soldiers in the district. And local resident Harry Tillman, who was a local resident, he was a key driver behind the memorial, so it's associated with him as well. Excuse me. So council planted and agreed to maintain the trees, and residents of the Papanui district were required to contribute to the costs of the trees as well as the plaques. One submitter told us that fallen soldiers' families each paid £1 towards a tree to remember the soldier. And the local RSA also contributed to costs. And there were planting days as well, where the RSA pitched in and planted trees. So the nature of the memorial as a living memorial reflects the historical trends of the period, away from static monuments, obelisks, and that kind of thing, towards more useful memorial buildings or living memorials, such as this one. And being a living memorial, it's a bit of a different nature. The trees and species have changed over time. We've observed this if you're in the neighbourhood. In some streets, but some original plantings remain, and replanted avenues continue that intent behind the memorial. Just lastly, members of the community have told us that the memorial is still relevant today in relation to the Anzac commemorations that occur, and also they've told us it's important to pass these stories down to the next generations. So I'll pass on to Suzanne for the planning side of things.
So on the next slide there.
Is it working? Sorry, Mark, could you, yes, there we go. Back one. There you go.
Right. So the 16 Papanui War Memorial Avenues were proposed as a group for heritage protection in the district plan when Plan Change 13 Heritage was publicly notified in March 2023. The Papanui Heritage Group and members of the community submitted in support of scheduling. There was one submission of opposition, and the avenues were included in the Plan Change 13 decision in September 2025. The 16 avenues of trees and plaques are now protected as a group, along with the surrounding legal road in the District Plan Heritage Schedule. Alteration to the protected heritage item requires resource consent to assess the effects on the heritage values of the avenues. So for the Condell Ave Street Renewal Project, this means that as part of the resource consent process, the heritage team considers the effects on heritage values of removal and replacement of trees and changes to the road layout, including build-outs in the cycleway. And just as a side note, outside of the resource consent process, removal of a mature tree which is dead in a state of irreversible decline or structurally unsound can be approved using the existing tree removal certificate process for public realm trees.
Right, so obviously now you've heard about the implication of the 16 streets within your area. It also means that Condell Avenue is one of those 16 streets. So massive implications on us in terms of street renewal. So as you heard from Susanna, it means that we will be required to do a resource consent for what we do, but we need to look at how we do it in a way that we will be granted a resource consent. So we're very limited in kind of the extent of the street renewals that we might consider for other areas, because what we need to think about is trying to preserve the look and the feel of that street to what it is now, but by making improvements at the same time. So in terms of engagement on a street renewal project, what we would normally and typically do would be go out and do a what would you like to see and how would we make some changes to your benefit and things like that. What we've actually considered is that the changes we're going to be making are very restricted and minimal. So we're probably actually going to have to look at more of an informed approach on, we're coming to you, we're looking to upgrade your street, the surface will be renewed, your footpaths will be renewed, your curb and channel will be replaced. We are proposing a kind of a mid-block crossing almost, so not a controlled crossing, but a kind of narrowing point where people can cross, so that the residents of the aged care facilities down Horndle Avenue have a easier way to cross the road. But in terms of overall look and feel, we're very much restricted in what we can do. So it is a more of an inform. And alongside that, we'd want to educate them on this information that we've been presented with today, because we are aware that many residents probably aren't aware of what's happened to their street and why it's their designation and what that means for them. So maybe we can tie that in with a bit of an information pamphlet or something that we can educate them on that change at the same time. So what we're looking at is something very simple in terms of changes. It's very much what you see today. There's going to be footpath on each side of the road, some berms. We're going to replace the deep dish channel with some curb and channel. But what we have found, and I'll show you on this plan, is that on that northern side, there are a load of street trees that will have to be removed in order for that to be facilitated. In order for us to get the curb and channel in, we need to remove those trees. There is also overhead power lines on that northern side. Unfortunately, they are not going to be undergrounded or replaced as part of this, but that also then has an impact on what trees we can be putting back in. And obviously, as you heard them talk about, those trees are not necessarily the trees that were planted back in the 1940s. Some of them have changed species over the years, and some of them are in poor health, good health. We've had an assessment done on them all, and we've had a talk with our colleagues in the heritage team and consenting team. And we've asked what the priority is, because we could put in some tree species on the northern side which don't grow too high, and then maybe don't reach the power lines. And we have some species that council can work with power lines. But we do have a directive that we can't impact on power lines from the government. What that means is that the species on the northern side would then differ from the species on the southern side of the road. It's been considered that they would have a preference that we actually maintain one type of species over having an avenue feel. So it would actually be that we'd maintain those southern trees and that consistent species on the southern side, but the trees we remove on the northern side would not be replaced. So in this instance, we wouldn't be putting back in the avenue feel, but we would be maintaining consistent species. That would be their preference. Interesting. So as you can see here, we are including that piece of the MCR that joins Arangi Road with Matson's Avenue. That little piece, unfortunately, has had to be pulled out from the bit that's just gone out for tender and for construction, because it does now require a resource consent to be implemented. But we have worked with the resource consent team to make sure that that is an acceptable kind of design and appropriate for that end of the Condell Avenue street. So that ties in quite consistently with what we've got further down Condell Avenue. Doesn't change the look and the feel too much. So that's just to make you aware that that little bit of the MCR is now part of the Condell Avenue street renewal project. And so our next steps would be that we will go out and engage with the community, as I said, in that kind of informed kind of educational kind of discussion, and then we'd have to take it back to the council for formal approval, and then we would proceed with our resource consent application. Any questions?
Thank you. I've got Victoria.
Well, thank you. I'm just finding my questions on my page here. What's the road classification of Condell Avenue? I'm talking about in terms of vehicle counts.
I believe it's a collector.
A collector road?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's parts of it that are quite a bit narrow, that's a bit further up. I want some more information around the possibility of a cycle greenway. You haven't really touched on it much, but it is in the paper, because I thought sort of the greenways were on more quieter streets. So can you talk to me about what underpins that decision to make this a cycle greenway?
Yeah, so cycleway greenways can only come in, well, not only come in, but they are generally only recommended where the vehicle volumes are below a certain threshold and when it's a relatively calm environment and we can promote that kind of sharing of the space. I don't believe we've got low enough volumes on that road, but I'd have to come back to you on that one.
Yeah, well, you've got 2 board members that live on Condell Ave, and I can tell you that it's not a quiet street. It's a real thoroughfare as a collector road. I'd be surprised if it actually wasn't a bit of an arterial. So, because my understanding was that a greenway is a shared road space, and I'd be quite alarmed if that was the case, given the volume and the speed of that traffic. Can we have some more information around that, please?
Yep, certainly.
And then just a couple more questions there. Returning then to the trees, I'm just struggling to reconcile a couple of things here. You're talking about the trees on the north side likely to be removed and not replaced so that you don't end up with 2 different types of trees. But under the heritage settings, you're not meant to be changing the look and the feel significantly by removing trees from one side. Surely you are changing the look and the feel. Can you just help me understand that a bit more?
Yeah, it relates to the restrictions because of those overhead lines. So we can only plant very low trees sporadically on the north. So it's the north side, which you wouldn't be able to achieve an avenue effect on both sides. So that it's kind of that those physical constraints limit the ability to create an avenue.
Well, you're less likely to create an avenue with just trees on one side.
Well, commonly it's 2 sets of trees, or it can be 3 lines of trees. But I think talking with the landscape architect who's not here tonight, she actually felt you'd achieve quite a strong avenue effect even with 1 line on that other side instead of sporadic planting, which is all you can do on the north due to the physical constraints.
I expect to receive some significant feedback on that particular issue because people do love their trees there. You mentioned that the trees have been inspected because some of them are looking pretty rough. So what's the state of the health state of the trees on that south side of the street? So and will any of those be removed because they look pretty ratty?
Yes, so there are some trees that will need some maintenance work to them or potentially come out due to ill health, and a tree assessment report will be included in the report that comes to council just as an attachment so that everybody can see that information. So it will be part of the scheme design that goes out, will indicate which trees are to be removed so that people are aware. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Did you look at the possibility of a greenway on Matson's instead of Condell? I mean, when you look at they're vastly different to look at those 2 streets. And I would have thought that Matson's lends itself better to a greenway. Has that been considered?
So Matson's is part of the major cycleway network. So that is a separated cycleway that is going to be constructed very soon, actually, within the next 8 weeks, probably will be underground there.
Sorry, a separated cycleway. Oh, sorry, not Matson's. I meant Windermere. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I was a bit surprised. Windermere. Yeah.
To be honest, that's not within the scope of this project. So within the scope of this project is focusing on a street renewal for Condell Avenue and making sure that we're upgrading the assets there. So that would have to be something else considered outside the scope.
Sure, I'm happy to look at that via another means, because if you determine that this isn't appropriate for a greenway because of the volumes of traffic and the speed of traffic, then that may be an alternative to look at there.
Absolutely.
Recognising that you haven't done any pre-engagement because you're concerned about the heritage overlay aspect of it, would you still consider some pre-engagement perhaps with the 2 retirement villages?
Oh, certainly they'll be certainly one of our key stakeholders. So we always like to find and acknowledge the key stakeholders in the area and make sure that we're upfront with them about these key changes that we're proposing. Certainly making sure that we're educating people about that heritage change as well. I think they'll have to go hand in hand because people will have a lot of questions about the limited effect they can have on the proposal.
Yeah. Thank you, Sunita, for allowing me my questions. I've just got two really short, quick, the final ones to finish. What does the consent requirement actually mean for the time frame? What is it? Yeah, what does it actually add?
It's not too bad. So what we'd be looking to do is as soon as council have made that decision, we would be applying for that resource consent. And whilst that is in process, we'd be concurrently doing our detailed design work. So we wouldn't, and we've actually got the detailed design team kind of looking at levels and information that we would need for that resource consent application now, so that when the council approval comes along, we can make that submission and application without too many changes being made. So in terms of overall impact on the programme, we should still be okay to be constructing when we want to, given that last time I saw you, I was here about the Northwest programme of works. That is still something that will factor in on the construction timeframe of Condell Avenue. So we will be programming Condell Avenue in and around the other transport projects and water work projects in your area.
Okay, so can you said constructing when we want to, what does that look like now? Because it has been pushed out numerous times. So given the current program of works up there in the northwest,
the earliest
anticipating construction?
The earliest it would be is in 2027, and I would be hopeful it would be around the springtime, so that we could have a really good construction window and just get it closed out before 2028 rolls around.
So can I just request for the comms around this that we don't give any more false assurances to the residents about when it's actually happening, because there has been a lot of confusion around
and I think
what's going on.
That's probably key in saying those dates, is that, you know, it does ultimately hang in on that program we're working with, on that Northwest program. So, you know, I could say those dates, but something in the massive jigsaw puzzle of work that we're trying to achieve in this area means the coordinated, program can shift it around.
Yeah, it just doesn't do a hell of a lot for our council reputation, elected member reputation, when you're telling people that things are happening on a certain date and then they just keep changing. So I'll just be mindful of that. My final point then is in the crossing point. The current picture shows that there is still a crossing point towards the Blythe intersection at the giveaway sign, and I note you said that there's going to be another mid crossing point and a narrowing perhaps closer to the retirement villages. Any thought into moving that away from that really, really busy intersection and moving it back up the street a little bit more? How definite are you with that crossing point at the intersection?
So the intersection with Blythe Road, so that's an existing crossing point, and as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any complaints or significant issues with that island that's situated there, and it is in a pretty good desire line. So we wouldn't look to change it unless we'd had feedback to suggest that it wasn't in the correct place for the existing crossing. For the one that you mentioned that we're proposing, that's opposite the Bellevue Care and Centre and Village. So that's that giant retirement village on the northern side, and then it kind of ties in nicely with that Condell retirement village on the south side. So that's kind of why we positioned it there, so that the more infirm have an opportunity to cross more easily.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Sunita.
Yes, Ashley. I'm just more concerned on the measurement of road space, because it is a busy road and no one does slow down. Where will we be losing car parks with the greenway, and just the overall layout where, like Victoria said, the crossover for people, can we move it closer to maybe where the villages are? Because if you're actually there physically, where the two locations are at the moment are a little bit more further than you actually think they are.
So we're retaining the existing crossing point, and we're adding the kind of narrowing outside the retirement village. So we're maintaining the two. We're not losing one over the other. We're just maintaining the two. So I don't feel like we could move it any better location than one we're proposing. But happy to take feedback on that.
My other question would be the raised platform. Is
Yep.
that a need?
So that is for the major cycleway. So that's already been approved by council. So just to be clear, that is an approved design and that isn't something we'll be seeking resolution for. That is just something that I'm showing you is included because it needs the same resource consent.
Whereabouts are you starting to plan these works? Like how far down are you going more towards Hudson or whereabouts are you beginning this road work?
So we start at Blythe Road and it will be to Matson's Avenue, our extent, yeah.
Mike?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's fair to say it's really disappointed at the delays that this project has had. And I guess that's where my question comes from. Like, have we seen much of a cost escalation and what's the budget looking like?
So in terms of cost, it just at the moment it's within budget, but we're still waiting on some feedback from quantity surveyors and things. So I can't confirm where we're at with that. We're also going out to our utilities providers at the moment to get costs around where the services are and what needs to be relocated as part of this project. So I can't talk to that today. But obviously, with the limited scope we have, it does mean that we're not running away with bells and whistles on and gold plating anything. It's just going to be a like for like replacement really with brand new assets for the community.
Sorry, you cut out on me. Then I jumped onto my wife.
He said, thanks, that's all the questions.
You're still getting frozen, Mike. Okay. Okay. All right.
And is
Simon.
that budget therefore decreased?
Oh, okay. Mike, we have lost you in the middle as well. We couldn't hear you.
Oh, that's all right. I'll talk to staff at another time.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Simon.
My question was about cost and budget, so I feel like that's been answered.
Okay. Thank you. John?
Yeah, quite a conundrum, that north side. Power lines out, trump trees, unfortunately. And with that explanation coming from the landscape architect, I sort of get it that this is one rare case where no trees is better than some trees for the avenue look. But I wonder if the architect could have another look at that. Victoria's, I think, quite correctly foreshadowed that this is going to be very topical when it comes to public consultation. And I'm thinking about sweetening the deal or the design with some, even if it's very low trees that are so insignificant in size that they don't distract the eye from the avenue trees, possibly fruit trees or something like that. And just attached to that comment, we're taking out those trees, so there would be a requirement to place 2 trees somewhere else.
Yeah, so the 2-for-1 tree policy does usually mean that where we remove trees, we have to replace 2 on the same area. Council staff and council are working on a kind of a strategy where there are situations where that is just physically unattainable at the moment, where we can't implement on the same place or the same location specifically. So there's like want of a better word, a spreadsheet that details where those trees are being removed and there's a necessity. So the money that we would have paid for those trees goes to that pot, and then there's an area designated within the ward that they would then be planted into. It's just something that we've seen coming up year after year now, and so they're looking to address that in a more robust way, I guess, because it is a struggle for us sometimes on some projects to find, with utilities underground and all that, the place to put 2 instead of 1 tree on the same street.
Thanks.
Ashley's got last one. Community engagement. How wide are you looking at doing that? Like how far up are you going to the side streets?
Yeah, and again, it's one around, like, we're telling people on Condell Avenue about their heritage designation, but there are 16 other streets as well. So we would at this stage only be focusing on the Condell Avenue immediately affected residents and informing them of this proposal because they are the ones directly affected by it.
I'm on that street and I haven't heard any of that.
Oh, no, we haven't been out yet.
You haven't?
No.
About the heritage?
No, so the heritage that was consulted on as part of the district plan.
Well, you don't get anything. So obviously you're narrowing your engagement, so maybe you need to look at going wider.
Well, so that's something I feel if we're going to put some information out about the Condell Avenue street renewal, some people might be like, that's not me, and put it in the bin if they receive consultation on it and they didn't live on Condell Avenue or a neighbouring street. But I think if there was maybe an opportunity for something to the other 16 streets to go out, and maybe that would be something that could be considered. But I don't think it should be tied in necessarily with the Condell Avenue street renewal, and then everybody gets a notification about that because they're not necessarily the ones directly.
You still use the road, main thoroughfare.
Maybe even like a community meeting with the restaurant group and the.
Oh, certainly we'll be doing localised engagement with that area. It's just more the other 16 or 15 streets, I should say, which are all over the Papanui area, that might not specifically want to know about the Condell Avenue street renewal, which we're seeking feedback on.
But sorry, just top over. But there are many other avenues, like for example, Think Papanui. Simon can give you feedback on that, just to reach out the wider network that this piece of work is, under consideration.
Yeah. So Kieran will have a list of stakeholders that, like key stakeholders that the information always will go to, like so advocacy groups and things, and disability action groups and things like that. They'll always get that information, no matter what consultation we're doing. Yeah.
Victoria, do you have a question as well?
Yes, I do. Just to sort of follow up supplementary, returning to the trees only on one side, recognising that we've got 16 heritage streets and avenues, are there any other streets or avenues of those 16 that have only got trees on one side?
Not that I know of, no.
Not that I'm aware of. Wouldn't know, I'm afraid.
Okay, and then just returning to the funding, Mike started raising it before he cut out. If the heritage status now restricts the extent of the street renewal and the development, so that we're ending up pretty much with what we had without any other bells or whistles, can we assume from that then that there will be extra budget available that we could perhaps use for other trees or for some other aspects to the design?
I would love
to. Because it's been de-scoped significantly, isn't it?
I would love to say that. However, the previous design was significantly over budget. So it's kind of paid to the fact that now we've de-scoped a little bit or restricted in somewhat the it's more in line with the budget that we had.
Okay.
So yeah, unfortunately not the case. So
there's already been a cutting the cloth almost.
Yes.
So this fits more within the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm just still flagging up. I think that tree part of that is going to be really contentious and may need some further thought. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it has come back and we need to really fine tune that before the questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's finish it off. Kia watea, kia mama, pinako, te tinana, te wairua, ite ata tangata. Koyara, erongo, whakaia, ake i runga. Kia tina, tai.
Thank you.